The first one relates to the judicial system and the election commission, the Central Election Commission. And I had made, you'll recall that I stated that under Lee Tung-Hui, these officials had been appointed and were further appointed under Shui-bian after the year 2000.
He kept on the same people?
You know, I don't know enough of the detail of who these individuals were, but I'm just going on the constitutional reform that allowed this, and the fact that both presidents, Lee and Chun, have paid a great deal of attention to making sure that their own, you know, that very good legal minds and officials were put in there, but people who were certainly sympathetic to their values and their ideology. Let me give you an analogy of what I'm trying to say. If as rumored, we have 2 or 3 of our Supreme Court judges step down in the next few years, whoever is the next president will be able to choose 1 to possibly 3 new Supreme Court members to the bench. And although we have a very tough process in which there is a committee and finally there is a Senate vote on this, the president's power to select a judge has traditionally, historically, always produced a person who has voted on the side of what the administration generally adheres to or asserts. And it's just natural to expect that somebody compatible with the president's or the current administration's values and ideology is going to be elected. I mean, he's going to be appointed and hopefully will pass through the election process. So I don't see that the litigation being initiated by the Blue Alliance will go far in the courts or basically produce any results favorable to what they would like. Now, as for the relationship between Lee Tung-Hui and Shui-bian, my understanding is that their relationship really didn't begin until after Shui-bian was elected and Lee has stepped down and had vacated the KMT chairmanship in the year 2000. And it was stated in the newspaper, of course, that Chun began to make pilgrimages to Lee Tung-Hui's home, and they became very good friends and had lots of consultation and so forth. It's clear that they both share a vision of what I would call Taiwan nationalism. And I would define that vision to mean that both of these politicians have dreamed that the Taiwan people should have the right of self-determination and should be able to choose the kind of governmental system, the kind of constitution, set of rules to run that government that they like. And both of these individuals, one raised and educated under Japanese colonialization, the other raised under Kuomintang rule and under the education system established after 1950. Both of these men are very close in terms of what they believe is best for Taiwan's long-term future. They don't feel comfortable being part of China. They don't feel a closeness with Chinese history and Chinese civilizational values. They're both very, very modernized, one through Japanese exposure, the other through British and American democratic history. So it's clear that Lee advises, Chun probably listens, Chun probably also talks. They share a great deal, I'm sure. But it would be reckless for me or anyone else to say that one looks up to the other as an apprentice looking up to a master or anything like that. I don't presume to know just how close they are, but I do know they share this long-term political vision of change and of producing a new constitution, basically.
A fundamental difference between blue and green supporters when they argue about the election and the shooting is that it seems completely believable to people on the blue side that Chen would stage an assassination attempt because it was predicted, and it was one of the things that the Green Party might do. It was predicted already, and they feel that he has a history of pulling tricks before before an election, and Green Party supporters simply, it is inconceivable to them that this could be the case because they feel that he really cares for the people. I do not doubt that he cares for his own people. It is obvious to me that he does not care for the other group of people on the island that don't vote for him. So I'm just wondering how such a large discrepancy between a person's character could exist.
Well, I think this has to do with the very broad perceptions shared by people supportive, say, of the Blue Alliance versus people who are very supportive and participate in the Green Alliance. The people in the blue camp and their supporters for several years now have perceived Chen Shui-bian basically as a kind of demagogue, as one who will stand up and say one thing, addressing, say, the United States or addressing China, and then turning around to his own people and saying something else. They view that kind of political spin talk, if I can use this American slang word, spin, as worthy of a demagogue and one who talks out of one side of his mouth and then turns around and talks out of the other side of his mouth. And the people in the green camp see this man as a leader who has been the champion of democracy, electoral democracy, for many decades. They have high admiration for his courage and for his devotion to his wife, and believe that his vision is what Taiwan should try to march toward or should try to achieve. So that these perceptions, again, I would submit, show you how deeply divided passions are, as well as the way people evaluate this leader. It's polarized Taiwan society in a way that I don't think anybody 5 years ago thought would happen. For example, I think just in the last few days, I saw an announcement where a number of scholars, very sympathetic to the Blue Alliance goals and ideals, have come out with a broad intellectual statement, and it's supposed to be published on May 4th. And you'll recall that in May 4th, I think it was in 1919, wasn't it, in Beijing, was the day in which great demonstrations burst out in Beijing and then Shanghai and other cities across China to protest foreign imperialism and to insist upon governmental reforms. And so these intellectuals, some at Academia Sinica, some at NTU, Guoli Taiwan Dashi, and elsewhere, are using this kind of exercise, which Chinese intellectuals have done throughout the centuries, to express their moral unhappiness with the state of political affairs in Taiwan. So you can see that these debates, these passionate clashes that have been going on and will continue to go on, really reflect a very sorely divided society. Very wounded, and this makes it hard to have democracy practiced right, because there's no trust now. And I think the problem is on both sides. Certainly the green camp doesn't trust the blue camp. They have great contempt for them. They see the blue camp as really achieving nothing in terms of democracy. They believe they did most of it through their street struggles and so forth. The blue camp, on the other hand, sees the fact that they were the ones who promoted this highly productive market economy in the 1950s that took off and created a Taiwan economic miracle, that gradually shepherded electoral democracy from local levels up to national levels, and did it in a peaceful way. Even Lee Tung-Hui, when he was chairman of the KMT and was president selected by the Kuomintang, claimed that this was a bloodless democratic revolution. He was proud that the KMT was doing this. And so followers and members of the KMT are bitterly disappointed that they don't get any credit for Taiwan's success. And so now both sides see each other as enemies and as destructive elements, impeding, obstructing the democratic process and the potential for Taiwan prosperity to be greatly enhanced.
Okay, let's assume the recount and everything goes nowhere and things stay the way they are.
Which I predict will truly happen.
First of all, what suggestions do you have for the blue camp to, in terms of their image and?
The blue camp is in terrible peril, in great difficulty. There's now great criticism from different groups in the party that a new leadership is necessary. Whoever this new leadership is in the next year or 2 years, they've got a big job of defining what the KMT stands for. The KMT, ever since it was been formed back in the late 19th century, stood for, it was a revolutionary party that was going to bring nationalism, democracy, and social welfare and a better livelihood to the Chinese people. It was going to unite China. And even when the KMT came to Taiwan, they continued that vision. And the question is now, what do they stand for? More and more, they say things that are exactly what the Green Camp say. And it's hard sometimes to tell what really is the difference between them. So they've got to define what they stand for. And that's going to take some doing, and I think there's a great deal of debate and differences of opinion in the blue camp as to what that is all about. You've got a group that is very Bantuhua, you've got a group that looks toward China. How they're going to resolve this, what kind of a set of principles they're going to resurrect or create anew, I really can't say. It's much easier for the Green Camp. They're very clear. Shui-bian has shined the spotlight on where Taiwan should go. They should be able to reform the legislative yuan, initiate a reform process of the Constitution, and establish a three constituency or three structural component part government like that, say, of the United States or Great Britain. Not a five compartmentalized government like the former one under the Kuomintang. Now, to what extent they're willing to change that constitution, to change the name and the flag and the anthem, this president, Shui-bian, says, well, I don't really intend to do that. But a lot of people don't believe him because he's not a very believable politician. He changes his mind quite a bit. And this is one reason why I think it's going to be difficult for China to talk with him. But politicians can change. And who knows? Who knows what the future will be in the next year or two for Taiwan? I just tell you, I could not predict it. There's no way I would dare or could predict what is going to take place. It's too uncertain.
You would say Taiwanese Americans, young Taiwanese Americans that support the Green Party, is that the KMT does not care for its people. They do not care about the people on the island of Taiwan. They feel that they will, if they were to ever come back into power, they would go back to their ways of taking money from the poor and redistributing for themselves. And
is that the image that they have of the KMT since they came to Taiwan in 1950? Is that the image of the younger people today? It certainly wasn't. I don't think that was really the image of the Tung-Hui people and their supporters. I don't think they ever saw the KMT like that. But I mean, among the younger people that you interact with today, this is their perception. Do I understand you correctly?
yes.
Interesting.
What's your response to that?
Well, I'm very. I have to say, I'm very puzzled and surprised to hear that that's the way they see the KMT today. There was, I mean, I look at the KMT up to the period of Jiang Jingguo. Then I see the period of the KMT under Li Tung-Hui and his supporters. And it's clear that the electoral process is accelerated skillfully under Li Tung-Hui. The common thing that unites Li Tung-Hui and Chen Shui-bian is this. Democracy must be promoted. We must uphold the principles of democracy on Taiwan, deepen democracy, because with democracy we can achieve our goals of building a Republic of Taiwan and achieve Taiwan nationalism. Democracy, in other words, is a tent to smuggle the process of Taiwan nationalism into total completion without alienating, hopefully without angering Beijing too much, and on the other hand, winning the support of the large democratic countries like the United States. Now that is clearly what the DPP and what Li Tung-Hui were trying to do when he was chairman of the Kuomintang. But it's interesting that the event of Haijian, or corruption in Taiwan politics, that comes only under Li Tung-Hui's administration, and particularly the administration in which he was elected president in March of 1996. From that time on, the Haijian problem, or black gold, or the corruption of politics in Taiwan, the buying of political favor in the Li Fa-yuan by construction companies, and on and on and on. This becomes a big problem for Taiwan politics. In the Jiang Jingguo era, in the Chiang Kai-shek era, there is no corruption on this scale. None whatsoever. There absolutely isn't. Minor corruption, repeatedly, yes. But big-time corruption, not on the scale of what happened in the mid-1990s and down to the present. It still continues. So to hear young people in Taiwan today making the comments that you've just said convinces me of one thing. They don't understand the political, economic, and social history of their own society.
I met Taiwanese Americans here who,
Well, they grew up in Taiwan,
well, no, they grew up in the States. Their parents are from Taiwan, and
but didn't the majority of them spend some time in Taiwan
They
as,
did,
as
they did.
children in Youjian and Shangshui and so forth? I mean,
they go back.
I know they're really Americanized, but I mean,
That they, yeah, that's how they feel.
well, all I can say is that if you're correct, that these are largely people who are who have never lived very long in Taiwan, maybe not more than 4, 5, 6 years, they would probably pick up all kinds of things that do not reflect the real history of Taiwan. As for young Taiwanese people in America who accompanied their parents here and grew up in the school system and so forth, number one, I do not believe they've read very widely or very deeply in the history of Taiwan, and they don't know it very well. Number two, they probably learned a great deal from their parents who if they came to the United States, probably did so with mixed motives. One, seeing that opportunity was greater than the United States, but on the other hand, having experienced some difficulties or unpleasantness in Taiwan, maybe that was a negative factor in why they decided to migrate to this country. But whatever the reasons for migration to the United States, it's very quick. It's very easy and very quick to lose touch and to lose understanding about your own society. And the pace of change in Taiwan has been extremely rapid in the last 15 years. I know that Melissa, the anthropologist here at Stanford, Melissa Brown, would point to the social interaction between Taiwanese and Bunchengren or mainlanders, and how that has affected the sense of Taiwan identity that's become more strong in the last 15 years. And it's an astonishingly short period in which these powerful feelings have developed, I think, in young Taiwan people that now I presume identify much more with American society.
It seems like times have changed since then, and their fear is that, my friend, or all these, my friend was stabbed in the early 80s. This notion is that the KMTs, if they regain power, could resort back to these methods, and I'm asking.
That's just an impossibility. The KMT could never turn the clock back to imposing martial law again. Martial law was imposed in 1949 by Chen Cheng for one reason: to try to put a shield over Taiwan to prevent communist infiltration. When I hear you say the things you just did, I'm stunned and puzzled by one very, very important thing. The discussion and focus on Taiwan is not placed into any context with any other country or historical change going on. And that is the relationship of Taiwan to mainland China. In 1950, the Civil War was still on. There was still a civil war being being fought on some of these islands in the Taiwan Strait. And that would continue, and there would be bombardments, from Xiamen over to some of the other islands that the nationalist troops held. And fundamentally, the whole martial law situation was one really directed to the concern of the government for communist infiltration and so forth.
I don't believe that they think martial law would be reimposed, but they fear some of the measures that the KMT took during that time, because it was only 20 years ago. And Lin and Song apparently have had a history of putting people away in jail or whatever.
In the 50s with the White Terror, this was still a byproduct of the government's concern about communist infiltration. And also, there was a concern for Taiwan nationalism as well. The government talked always about the threat of communism. It played down the threat of Taiwan nationalism. It didn't want to appear that this was a big problem in their own midst. And they tried to just forget that Ba ever happened. The KMT just would not talk about it. And they would only begin to look at this problem honestly and figure out how to deal with it finally by the mid and late 80s, when liberalization and opening up and all kinds of change had taken place in Taiwan, plus, of course, a huge spurt in prosperity. People's per capita incomes went up to more than $10,000, $12,000 a year.
What did they try to do in the mid-'80s to address 228?
Well, the big thing the big turning point, I think, in elections came in '79 when new election law was passed that made it much more fair, and the rules were upheld by the election commission people very fairly for both the Tung-Hui and for the KMT candidates who were running in these local elections. And at that time, you see, beginning in '78, '79, election seats had opened up for the Li Fa-Yan and for the National Assembly. And Tung-Hui people were winning some of those seats. And it was a kind of an inevitable tide that seemed to be going on through the 80s, that the Tung-Hui was getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And the KMT responded by trying to be more open, more, more attentive to people's needs and everything. And finally, when martial law was actually lifted in 1987, you have to remember that already the DPP formed illegally, and Jiang Jingguo decided not to do anything at all about it. He would just ignore it and continue to promote the democratic process. In fact, speeding it up. And he's the one who decided that now was the time to really open up democracy and push it as fast as he could. But then he died in 1988, in January, and suddenly Lee Tong-Hui, who was his selected vice president, came to power. Lee Tong-Hui had to fight a big battle with the KMT conservative heavyweights, but he slowly knocked one off after another. And by 1996, he was the sort of powerful chairman who had brought about a reform of the Constitution so that now people could directly elect the president, vice president, and would also elect the governor of Taiwan province. So these are all the things that the KMT did, but always because the Tung-Hui was sort of biting at the rear end, pushing. And there was pressure from the United States as well. But I think if the KMT can ever redefine itself, which is a big if, there is no way under the current situation that I think they could rationalize, least of all, think up a good ideological reason for why to somehow restrict democratic process and people's rights under the current Constitution. It's been very much revised. I think the big problem now is that there is very strong divided passions and ideas about Taiwan's future. And there's one group now. You have maybe it is becoming the majority group. I don't know, because the figures on the election are somewhat, problematic. But clearly, there is a large group in Taiwan now that believes that Taiwan should have the right to its national, what do you call it? Being able to decide its national sovereignty and national fate. And then there's another group that says, yes, we should try to do everything we can for our democracy, but we have to think about how to deal with mainland China. We just can't ignore it. It's not going to go away. And the problem is, indeed, is mainland China, because mainland China still looks at Taiwan as part of a civil war.